Hi everyone, my name is Robin Lewis and this is the outside of my workshop seen from my backyard. The workshop is made using concrete blocks, this standard size. The one thing that I don't like about them is that they don't match the house in style or in period. It's obviously a very functional look and I wanted to try and mask this as much as possible. I was originally going to weatherboard this entire house over time, but it was so expensive, so I had to go for something else. And in this case, what I thought I'd do is continue the cement sheet that is used upstairs. I'd continue that look on the downstairs section as well. So weatherboards down the side, cement sheet on the front and back of the house. So the first thing was to get all of the 2x4s, these are treated pine timber, and cut those and drill all of the holes necessary to attach it to the concrete blocks. Then I could start attaching these to the wall. So in this case, the first one I lined up with the doorway. I wasn't worried about it being plumb. I just wanted to make sure that it followed the line of the doorway. And then I could drill a small pilot hole just so I knew where to drill. And then I would go back and drill the entire depth of the hole. Then I could knock the diner bolt or expanding bolts in. Then I could screw that in with a driver. It's an expanding bolt that goes into an 8mm hole in the concrete, and as you drill, it opens up this sort of expanding sheath, and it's incredibly strong. So 3 of these per board. This thing's never going to come down, but I just wanted to make sure that it was on solid. So then I got to work adding these to the wall with 450mm centers. That's the code here in Queensland because we are a cyclone territory. And once all the timber was up, I could attach the sheets. So these are 6mm fiber cement sheets, and the thickness of the sheets is what determines the spacing of the studs. Because I was doing this myself, I put a couple of nails into the timber so I could get this board up and lined up, and then I could start nailing it off. One thing to remember is that this is just a covering of the block wall, so it's not like this is making up the structure or rigidity of the wall. So all this really needed to do was be attached to the timber, which was attached to the concrete, and that was enough. So you'll notice I don't nail all the way through the cement sheet, all over it, in all of the normal nailing spots. Again, all I wanted to do was make sure that it wasn't too hollow or springy, and that was enough because the actual structure of the wall is in the concrete block. I ended up doing 2 sheets in each session, so I'd basically finish work, come down and do a panel each day. These first panels were 1.8 meters long. Now on this next panel I'm using a full sheet which is 2.4 meters long, and it started to become a bit cumbersome trying to get these sheets up by myself. I found a wasp nest along the way that I had to put a piece of timber over, so using a 6-meter length of PVC pipe, I knocked it down. Wasn't sure if there was wasps in there, but it turned out that there wasn't. You can see I'm using some plastic packers here on the timber. It was only after I'd done that first section that I learned that I was supposed to actually keep the timber off the concrete wall. There shouldn't be any direct contact between the timber and the concrete. Joey from King Post Timberworks let me know on the podcast. He has a lot of building experience. So from here on in, I'm making sure that wherever the timber is fastened to the concrete, there's a plastic spacer in between so the timber doesn't actually touch the concrete. Here I'm putting on my first full sheet, and you can see me using my head as a clamp to try and hold it in place. It really was a bit tricky handling this, especially when the wind picked up. When I got to the window, I had to continue the angle of the concrete window sill down onto the timber that was going to butt up against that. Eventually, the windowsill, the timber windowsill, would sit on the concrete and on the timber stud. So I just had to continue that angle down so that the sill would sit flush on both surfaces. Once I had that set up, I could move on, continuing with the same process of drilling into the concrete and use an expanding bolt to hold the timber in place. You may have noticed that I was using noggins between the vertical studs, and these particular noggins, I made some notches to allow any moisture to fall through them and out the bottom end. These windows are designed so that if any rain gets in behind them, you don't caulk the bottom side so that the water can get out. I couldn't put any solid noggins in there because otherwise the water would have been trapped there. So this is just a way of allowing that water out eventually. Now this is where I made my first real mistake. You can see I'm cutting out a rectangular section, forgetting that I needed some cement sheet above the window as well. I scored the line that I wanted to cut using that carbide tipped fiber cement sheet cutter, and then went back with a grinder just so that I could get the cuts a little bit nicer and smoother, and it was a bit easier and quicker than using that tool. So here you can see I've pulled that piece down, and I actually should have left some of it above the window. So this meant that I had to come back later and add a patch in that section. When I put up this panel, I'd realized that I'd made the mistake on the other one. So here I cut out just a section of the window, so that was all one sheet. But that was it. All of the fiber cement was up. That was the hard part done. So now I went about jointing the gaps because I wanted to have this as one single surface. After putting down the jointing mesh, I got some jointing compound and forced that into the gaps, making sure to get as much of that into the gaps and into the mesh as possible. This stuff dried incredibly hard. I was not expecting it to be so rock solid. For this next step, I'm going to try something that I'm not sure if it's going to work. And if you know that it's not going to work, I apologize. I can't hear you screaming at the monitor right now. This is a top coat or final coat for gyprock, which is normally used on plasterboard. All the finishes for the cement sheet or fiber cement sheets, they all have a bit of a texture. There's no such thing as a sandable final coat for cement sheet. Well, at least not that I could find. This I've used before inside, and you can get a really nice finish. This will match the cement sheet finish as it is now. The problem is I'm not sure if this is supposed to be used outside. These walls out here don't get very much weather or very much rain, so it should be okay. And this is going to allow me to get the finish that I want, but I'm not sure what's going to happen when we have our next big downpour. This final coat is really easy to work with, and the only thing you need to do is make sure that you spread it out so that you can feather the join enough. So that just means making it fairly wide. You can see here outside of that join, and then as you sand, you create a gentle ridge from the one sheet to the other, and that'll just hide that join. It's quite easy to sand. A lot of the time guys will use hand sanders for this, but because I had the option of using an orbital sander, that made it pretty light work. Here I'm adding the window sill that I made out of some treated timber, and then I can caulk the gap between the window and the sill. However, if any water does get behind that window, it can still come out and run down the concrete block wall behind the cement sheet. I cut some sections of the fiber cement and glued and nailed that to the inside of the window cavity, and then used some more treated pine just to create a simple frame around the window. Then a quick trip down to the hardware store to match the color of the paint that was already there. Turned out it was a color bond paint. If you're in Australia, you'll know what that means. So it was quite easy to get the same color. The last step was to add some trim to the top and bottom of the cement sheet. So this is all just some basic treated pine, and I'm creating a bit of a profile here with my nail gun. Anywhere that I had to join the trim in the same direction, I use scarf joins. It just makes the gap less noticeable and it's also a bit stronger. Then all that was left was to paint the trim and it was done. One thing that you might notice about this that's a bit strange is generally your door sits on the outside of the frame, so you wouldn't have the door recessed looking at it from the outside. I had to do this because of the way the door works with the bearer above this wall, so it was a bit of a limitation, and I think it turned out okay. It's obviously not what you would normally see in a normal building, especially the way I've painted the entire inside of that frame, the color of the door frame, so it's all white on that inside, whereas it's the grey paint on the outside. But I'm quite happy with the way it turned out. It's a very ad hoc building, so I think all in all it turned out okay. The next step is going to be to render this side of the wall. This is going to be a functional area, so I'm not too worried about it looking particularly good. It'll be a lot cheaper that way. And then on the other side of the workshop, I'm going to use weatherboard, so the weatherboard will continue from the original part of the house all the way down. So that's it for phase 1 of cladding the outside of the workshop walls. I still have the other 2 to do, which I will be filming. That's it for this video. If you guys enjoyed it, please go ahead and click that thumbs up. And if you haven't already, I'd like to encourage you to subscribe. Thanks very much. My name's Robin Lewis, and I'll talk to you guys soon.